Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the top 5 wide receiver busts for 2023. These are the key players you must avoid in your drafts, and we're making sure you fade them 100% in 2023. Before we do, make sure you leave a comment at the end at this video and let us know who your players that you're avoiding. Which wide receivers are completely off your draft boards in 2023? And leave a comment at the end of this video and let us know, what do you think of our top 5? So let's get started right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And help me decipher through all the fantasy busts in the industry. I have my pal and my Friday friend, Ben Wasley. You can follow him at Fantasy First Down, no O on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
What is happening? It's preseason. It feels like football's finally here. We're actually seeing people in pads. It's awesome. It's great. People say preseason doesn't mean anything. It definitely means something. There's a lot to learn here, so I'm excited to get into some of the guys you got to watch out for in your drafts.
Yes, yeah. Honestly, nothing gets me going like a little third string quarterback throwing to a wide receiver that's not going to make the roster. But yes, but on the flip side, when you see those starters in there, it's not necessarily about production. It's about who's actually on the field that's important. So those are the things that we'll be talking about on Monday's show as we break down our takeaways from the week 1 of preseason. But Ben, before we get started today, we're going to talk some wide receiver busts.
Yeah.
Now, I gave you a little of a homework assignment. We got a solid top 5 today. But I guess my question is, there's going to be a couple players we don't talk about. Is there someone that is an honorable mention in your eyes as a potential wide receiver bust in 2023?
Look, there's quite a few guys around that I feel like are getting drafted a little bit higher. I feel like we've got the main guys covered. But there's a few guys on the periphery where people are kind of taking them quite early as their upsides pick at the end of drafts, where I just don't think they're really the value there. Guys like Jalen Hyde, people are still drafting him in their drafts, and people like that. He's not going to see the field. Stop getting stuck on the rookies late in drafts. Take the guys that you know are possibly going to produce and have a little bit more upside.
A good segue to that is J.J. Zacharyson did a really good job breaking this down last year. And it made me look into it myself, is if a wide receiver rookie's drafted within the top 100 picks, their hit rates are pretty good. Anything after that, it's very bad. So I know typically that makes a lot of sense because the later you draft players, the lower the hit rates. But when you're comparing even against veteran counterparts, if they're not elite of the elite rookies, they usually don't produce for fantasy. So that's a good tidbit there. Let's get into our top 5. First off, Jamie, always a pleasure, my good man. Glad to have you back on. Always glad to have you on. We're talking about wide receiver busts. And at number 5, you have Christian Watson. Current ADP is wide receiver 24. Tell us why you're kind of hesitant on Christian Watson in 2023.
I don't understand the Christian Watson hype. He was really touchdown reliant last year. Like, over a third of his points came from touchdowns. Realistically, that's not going to happen again this year. They were 11th in passing touchdowns last year. They had Aaron Rodgers. He passes the ball a lot. He's very good at it. They've now got Jordan Love. If you just watched the preseason game an hour or two ago, he looked pretty bad against the Bengals' second defense. That wasn't even their first string defense. He looked mediocre at best. Now, he was trying to find Watson, but he kept missing him over and over and over again and just having to check down low. Now, I really don't want that guy on my team, especially if I'm drafting him as essentially one of my wide receiver 2s. There's a top 24 wide receiver. He should be closer to like a wide receiver 30 for me. I just don't think that offense is going to run through their wide receivers. I don't think Watson's the guy to really carry that load. If it wasn't for those touchdowns, we wouldn't even be talking about it now. The amount of touchdowns he received was ridiculous. It's not going to happen again. It's going to regress. And his volume will increase a little bit. He is a second-year player, so he's going to improve. But we're really drafting him at his ceiling. There's so many other players we could draft at their floor and then have some upside if things click. We need things to click for Watson to get any value at all out of a pick in this range.
So last season, he played 8 games, over 60% of the snaps. In those games, he averaged 81% of the snaps. He averaged 3.4 receptions, okay? Nothing special at all. 16.6 PPR points per game on just 3.4 receptions. Okay. So that directly mirrors your comment about the touchdowns. Okay. That means, so I did an analysis on this a couple years ago. It's called points per reception, meaning that it's actually how many fantasy points a player generates every time they catch the ball. Okay. So he averaged 4.9 fantasy points per reception every time he caught it, okay? Just to give you an idea of how ridiculous that is, Jamar Chase, his rookie season, averaged 3.7, okay? So a whole point and 1.2 more, okay? If you just give him Jamar Chase's that number, he drops to 12.7 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 31, 32, and 39 over the last 3 years. So outside the top 30. So I'm 100% on board with this fade because it is not sustainable. And like you said, it's Jordan Love, not Aaron Rodgers anymore. So I agree 100% with this. All right, jump down to number 4. It's Diontae Johnson. And so I think a lot of people are they love Deontay Johnson's a good route runner. So Matt Harmon's talked them up a little bit about that stuff. And great. Deontay Johnson's also been a huge target getter over the last few years. Totally understand that. Got it. However, there's a new quarterback in town. And also Matt Canada does not, Matt Canada is one of those coordinators I'm not excited about. I still don't really understand what the deal with Matt Canada is, like what he does and why he has a offensive coordinator job in the NFL. Still don't really understand. But anyway, so I just wanted to take a look at how Diontae Johnson performed with Kenny Pickett specifically, because that nothing else really matters. So give us a baseline understanding with Pickett. All right. Averaged 8 targets a game. On those 8 targets, he averaged 8.5 PPR points per game. That is not good. That's very bad, actually. The 17-game pace for him with those 8 targets is 136 targets. Now, that's a good target count. However, it's not good for Diontae Johnson. Diontae Johnson in 2020, 144 targets in just 15 games. In 2021, 169 targets in 16 games. My point is here, his fantasy production is tied to volume. And I don't expect now with Allen Robinson there, Pat Freiermuth, now they're talking up this backup tight end. You also have George Pickens there, Najee Harris. I just don't really see him getting the volume he needs to be a consistent wide receiver too. So even if, for example, I looked at his points per reception, right? And I wanted to apply it to those targets. Of course he's going to bounce back because he had 0 touchdowns at any point of last year. He had 0 touchdowns. So if you just apply his career touchdown rate to the 8 targets he gets back up to 12.1 PPR points per game. That would have been wide receiver 32 in 22, 35 in 21, and wide receiver 40 in 2020 on a per game basis. What that tells me is he's probably being drafted at his ceiling. And honestly, last year, all the Steelers receivers were like outside the top 50 in points per game. So I'm not interested. I don't see I'm not taking him at all this year, and I favor George Pickens personally. But what's your thoughts, Ben? Are you taking him this year, or you think he's a bust as well?
Look, I do agree that I really actually prefer George Pickens. I like Pickens a lot. The talent is there. The personality issues caused him to drop a little bit in drafts, and I think he kind of slipped through a few cracks. Had some major injuries in college as well that really affected him. But I had him in my college fantasy team, and he was really good. So he's someone that I think we're missing a little bit. Having said that, I also like Diontae Johnson. I was a little bit nervous about him when I was hearing a lot of talk about the offense needing to be really run heavy and things like that, and using Najee Harris and Jalen Warren a lot. But Johnson's the guy that gets all the targets. And it happened like literally just an hour and a half ago in the preseason game. First drive, 3 targets. They only passed the ball like 5 times. It goes to Johnson a lot of the time, and that touchdown regression is probably going to happen. He finished as the wide receiver 29 last year or something in PPR. If he just got his average of 7 touchdowns, he's the wide receiver 18. There is upside there. There is room to move. If things click for him, I feel like he could be a value there. So unlike Watson, where I feel like we're drafting him at his ceiling, I feel like we're drafting him about reasonably. I feel like it's about the right zone for him. Is he someone I'm targeting? Not really, but if it's a PPR league, I know he's the kind of guy that can slip because he's not really a fancy name, because people don't really see there as being a lot of upside. But in PPR, there is a reasonable amount of upside. You're getting a lot of points for those receptions, and if there's touchdown regression, he could well be the kind of guy that could be a weekly wide receiver too.
Last season, he had 5 games over 5 receptions. 4 of those came in Mitch Trubisky starts. That's all I'll say. I'll finish on that. All right, let's go down to the next one. It's DJ Moore. And this time, you got me upset. This one's kind of one of my guys, so I'm excited to hear your take on this one. DJ Moore, ADP wide receiver 22. So why is he a bust for you in 2023?
So firstly, DJ Moore, really pretty good wide receiver. Okay, very talented. We all understand that. But He's going to be playing with Justin Fields. Justin Fields, not a particularly good passer of the ball. Do you know how many times last year Justin Fields had more than 190 passing yards in a game?
Zero.
Twice. We'll
All
give him two. But realistically, that's a tiny amount of passing yards. Most weeks, if your quarterback is under 200 yards, you're like, well, what the heck was he doing? He must have had an absolute shocker. A lot of the top quarterbacks, if they're getting under 200 passing yards, they probably got injured halfway through the game. But he's doing that every single week. He's getting yards with his legs. They're using the rushing attack a lot. They're going to really lean on that. So there's not a lot of volume there for DJ Moore. He's going to need to get over half of the passing yards in a given week in order to get 100 yards. And a lot of the time, you need your wide receiver twos to be having those 100-yard games to give you any sort of volume, to give you any sort of value. The second issue is only 17 passing touches. That means there's really only one passing touchdown each week to go around. And DJ Moore's not exactly known for his touchdown volume. He only had 8 total red zone targets last year. So realistically, where's the upside? You've got to hope that Justin Fields takes a massive step forward, not just a small step forward so that he's going, 250 passing yards a game. He's going to need to have enough volume to service DJ Moore and the rushing attack and his legs, but also all the other receivers they got in there, like the Darnell Moody's of this world and Cole Kmet, who we talk about as well. I really don't like DJ Moore, especially not in PPR, but even in half PPR, I just don't see the upside. He's not a wide receiver 2 for me. I've got him down at wide receiver 30-ish, and that's only because of the talent. The situation's horrible. If we'd had Darnell Moody in our top 30 last year, people would have laughed at us. It's ridiculous, but DJ Moore is not so much better that we can start moving him up into the top 24 wide receivers when there's a lot of other guys who are going to get that base of a lot of receptions it's going to make him very reliable week to week.
The Justin Fields stuff, okay. Last year, he was, all right, if you look at when they acquired Chase Claypool in week 9, he played 7 more games, okay? Here's the target distribution. Cole Kmet led the team, 38 targets. David Montgomery, number 2, 21 targets. Claypool and Mooney, 17 targets. Claypool only played 5 games. Mooney only played 3 games. He had nothing. He was throwing to S. Equimenia St. Brown out there. I remember a play specifically because I was obsessed with Fields last year that he would throw this little dump at the guy's hands and just boop. And I'm like, oh. It was awful. The other aspect of this, I think that's important for Fields and that entire offense is not only is DJ Moore in the offense now, but Mooney's coming back. He'll be healthy. Well, not healthy, but he's coming back to be the number 2. Claypool hopefully has another year in the system and hopefully will be a little bit better as well. But the other aspect is we keep having this whole entire argument about mobile quarterbacks every time. We pretty much had the same conversation last year about Jalen Hurts. We had the same conversation about Josh Allen 4 or 5 years ago. And as soon as they get an elite talent, guess what happens? They go, it happens. It does. And it's been pretty flawless. Even with Kyler Murray, there really isn't a lot of opportunities where a mobile quarterback who's known for his legs, didn't have a lot of passing yards, then all of a sudden he gets the talent around him, and all of a sudden he's good all around. So I just think that's why I'm buying it. Moore's been very good with everybody not named Baker Mayfield. He's also got 14 PPR points per game floor with every quarterback, Kyle Allen, you name it. So I think that he does offer a nice floor even with bad quarterbacks. And I think Justin Fields, unfortunately, I can't prove it with numbers because if you look at the numbers last year, it's not there necessarily. But Justin Fields, from a fantasy perspective, was a stud, mostly because he runs. But I get where you're coming from on this one. But final thoughts about DJ Moore before we move on.
I think we've been spoiled a little bit with the running quarterbacks recently. I think we see Josh Allen and we see Jalen Hurts and we go, oh, it's only going to take another year or two and suddenly it'll be Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. But he could be Blake Bortles or Tyrod Taylor. There's plenty of other quarterbacks who've been running quarterbacks who've never transitioned into a passing quarterback. And it's very possible Fields will be that guy. Even if Fields is the Jalen Hurts style guy, we're still drafting him as his ceiling. I just feel like we're being too aggressive and he needs to slip down a little bit more. I'd much rather take someone safer like a Chris Godwin than a DJ Moore who we know is going to have to rely on his quarterback taking a massive step forward.
You know what? Agree to disagree, but the best part too is we'll see how it plays out. I'm excited. That's good stuff. All right, let's jump down to number 2. Number 2 is the Commanders wide receivers, McLaurin and Dotson. I just put them together. And I'm sorry. I said top 5, and I lied to the people. So I apologize. If you want to drop off right now because you're disgusted with me because I'm a liar, I understand. And I want to talk about both these guys because I think the first thing that people are going to talk about is Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy's coming over, all this pass volume, Patrick Mahomes, yada, yada, all this stuff, okay? So before we get into all that, I want to talk about that Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett are not Patrick Mahomes. And so prior to Patrick Mahomes, there was a quarterback named Alex Smith as the quarterback. And for most of us know who Alex Smith was, solid quarterback. But if you remember, the Chiefs' passing offense wasn't some game breaker under Alex Smith for the most part. 2017 was his best season. But from 2013 to 2017, the 5 seasons that Alex Smith was the quarterback. And honestly, if you want to sit there and tell me that Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett are closer to Patrick Mahomes, sure, why not? You do that. I don't think that's the case. I think if you got to put those guys on the Alex Smith spectrum. So here's the thought here. 231 passing yards per game in year 1 of the system with the Chiefs. Over that time frame, he was about 223, like over that span, right? That's almost identical to what the Commanders had last year. Alex Smith, over that time frame, 23 touchdown passes over that time frame. And then last year, the Commanders had 24. So my point is, if you look at the stats side by side, the passing offense with Bieniemy and all those guys were a part of the staff, with Alex Smith, more of a conservative style passing game because of the quarterback play. Right there, you're talking maybe 9 passing yards a game in identical touchdowns. So then the question is, okay, how much better do we expect the passing offense to be this year? Well, Sam Howell last year had 19 pass attempts in his lone start. Okay. Jacoby Brissett last season in his starts, Amari Cooper, wide receiver 13, very solid. Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver 49. Okay, if Jacoby wins the job, maybe there's a chance where McLaurin kind of replicates an Amari Cooper type season. I understand that. But Donovan Peoples-Jones is the number 2, wide receiver 49. All right. So let's look back at 2022. McLaurin, right now today, going wide receiver 23. Last season, 13.3 PPR points per game was the wide receiver 26 on a per game basis. In 2021, it was the wide receiver 31. And in 2020, the wide receiver 35. If you look at Dotson, wide receiver 37 in ADP, he was wide receiver 42 last season, wide receiver 45 it would have been in 2021, and wide receiver 56 in 2020. So I just feel like both these guys are being drafted with this idea that the passing offense is all of a sudden going to mirror the Chiefs passing game. I think they're getting a bump in that sense. Now, I do think McLaurin, if I was doing a rankings episode, like if I was actually going to tell you who would finish, I think McLaurin will finish higher. But on a per game basis, I just don't think he offers like mid-range wide receiver upside each week with Sam Howell with this quarterback or Jacoby Brissett. So that's my breakdown on the Commanders wide receivers. Quick thoughts, Ben.
With McLaurin, I'm inclined to agree. I feel like there isn't the same upset side there as there are a lot of other guys in that range. Having said that, we're saying that Sam Howell's going to be a problem, but he's not exactly worse than Carson Wentz or Taylor Heineke or anyone they had last year. So I can't expect that he's going to take a massive step down. It's not like he's going from Patrick Mahomes to Sam Howell. He's going from someone about as good as Sam Howell to Sam Howell. And Sam Howell has a bit of an arm. Like he's a solid. There's a reason they call him Slinging Sammy Howell. Like he is a guy who can air it out a little bit, and McLaurin needs that sort of player. So I can imagine a situation where he could get enough volume. I can imagine a situation where he could finish as a wide receiver too. But Dotson's the one where I really disagree. Dotson's a guy who was drafted in the top half of the first round, really talented player, started to hum later in the season. In the last 5 weeks, he finished as the wide receiver 18. And he was doing that with mediocre quarterback play. He's into his second year. We love our second-year wide receivers. Second-year wide receivers is where they start to hum. So we've got to expect that Dotson's going to take a step forward. At an ADP of 37, he's actually a buy for me. I really like him there. McLaurin, I can take or leave, whatever. But Dotson's the kind of guy we could imagine him stepping up. He's got that path to target. He's got that path to volume. And he's got a quarterback who'll pass it enough to make him worthwhile. If, for example, Jacoby Brissett happens to take over, we saw Jacoby Brissett able to keep Amari Cooper as a top 10 wide receiver last year. So there is the talent there around him to support him. Is Eric Bieniemy going to use them like that? Well, maybe. He doesn't have Travis Kelce there anymore to rely on, and Logan Thomas is injured at the moment, and we both love Logan Thomas, but realistically, I still have him as my tight end 20. So I think that he's going to have to rely on McLaurin and Dotson. We have to expect that if they're going to pass to someone, it's going to be one of those guys. They can't really lean on the ground game with Robinson and Gibson. They're not really good enough to rely on that. I feel like these are their 2 best talents, so they're going to have to use their 2 best talents.
Okay. Yeah, I think on that one, I would just say that, the Amari Cooper comparison, I think if anybody, Terry McLaurin will be the Amari Cooper role type player. I just think that if you're looking at Dotson would probably fit better in a Donovan Peoples-Jones deep threat role. But we're talking Bieniemy's offense versus the Cleveland offense, and I don't even want to get into all that. So another one. Good, agree to disagree on that one. All right, Deebo Samuel, last one on the episode today. Deebo's wide receiver 16 in ADP right now. So tell us why you're fading Deebo.
I have so many questions, and I don't have questions for you specifically. I have questions for whoever's drafting him as the wide receiver 16. What were you watching last year? What were you seeing? What happened that made you go, oh, Deebo Samuel, this is the guy I have to have in my fantasy team? Are you living in 2021? I don't understand what's happening. He was not good last year, and I admit that he knows he wasn't good last year and that he needs to improve. But they've got Christian McCaffrey now. They've still got George Kittle. Brandon Ayuk's not in the doghouse anymore. If you look back to 2021, they had no talent but Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel was the running back. Deebo Samuel was the wide receiver. Deebo Samuel was basically the tight end of the quarterback. He was essentially doing everything. And that's why he was the wide receiver 3 or something insane. But every other year, he hasn't had anything like that. In 2021, he had 15 touchdowns. He's had 12 in his other 3 seasons combined. He had 18.2 yards per reception. He's had under 12 yards per reception in every other season. He's going to have a massive drop back. He was a wide receiver 24 production maybe is an upside for him, but realistically last year he was way below that as well. If at least 2 of McCaffrey, Kittle, and Ayuk is healthy, there's no way that Samuel can pay off wide receiver 16 production. It's just not going to happen. And you can say, oh, look, 2 of them are going to get injured. There's no reason to believe that. McCaffrey has been healthy in the majority of his seasons that he's played. He's had 1 or 2 injuries, but for the most part, he's pretty healthy. And even if he gets injured, Elijah Mitchell's still going to get used. He's going to get his touches as well. George Kittle gets injured occasionally, but realistically, you expect 13 or 14 games from him. And when he plays, he's pretty good. And we don't even know what's happening at quarterback. Brock Purdy's fine, but he's kind of semi-injured. Is it going to be Trey Lance? I don't want Trey Lance passing to my wide receiver 1. Is it going to be Sam Darnold? I don't want Sam Darnold passing to my wide receiver 1.
I will not accept Sam Darnold slander on this podcast, young man, all right? You leave him out of this, all right?
I just don't see it. What are you seeing with Deebo Samuel? Between weeks 7 to 14, when Christian McCaffrey arrived on the team, he was the wide receiver 39. The wide receiver 39, and we're drafting him as the wide receiver 16. It's ridiculous. Stop it. Stop it now. You have a problem.
Well, if you need help, go call 1-800-GET-HELP. Don't draft Deebo Samuel. All right. I actually have all the 49ers players other than CMC lower than ADP. Because if you just start looking at the games last season with Purdy when they were all together, Deebo was the best of the receiving core, meaning outside of McCaffrey. He did have the best points per game, but he was still capped. Like it was 14.2 PPR points per game in the 5 games. But when I dive in deeper, it's not really pretty. And I'll tell you why. So first off, what's 14.2 PPR points per game mean? That would have been outside the top 20 over the last 3 years. Wide receiver 20 all the way to 26 in 2020. So right now, ADP doesn't make sense there from that. But the consistency was not good, okay? He had 2 games over 16 PPR points per game and 3 games where he was outside the top 24. So very inconsistent. Now, people are going to if it's a best ball format, this might be a better option for you because he does have those spike weeks. But I think the biggest key is the rushing. Like the touchdowns he had 2 years ago from the ground game aren't there. The red zone carries are now going to CMC versus what it was with Deebo. And that was a huge problem for him as well, which is why I actually have him as one of my biggest fades, along with Ayuk, who also, by the way, he averaged under double-digit fantasy points in those 5 games. So everybody's being impacted by this. They're going to be very good, very efficient. But I think the biggest problem with the 49ers is their defense is dominant. So that there isn't really a necessary need for a shootout ever. So, when are they going to have this huge shootout all the time to, get more pass volume from Brock Purdy, who is coming off an arm injury? So I agree with you there. Any final thoughts before we close out the show, Ben?
I think that defense thing that you mentioned is massive. They do have a really good defense. We saw Deebo spike a little bit in the playoffs, but they're playing against the best offenses in the league. So it makes sense that their defense is going to struggle a little bit comparatively, and they're going to have to chase points. Most weeks, they're not going to have to chase points. They can just run and do that, and they don't need Deebo at all. So he's going to look good against good teams, but for the most part, he's going to really struggle. I really don't see it. Stop drafting him.
Yes. First of all, read the title of the show and listen, people. Once again, this is the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I want to thank my co-host today, Ben Wasley. You can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy First Down. Ben, tell the people what you got upcoming at Razzball and wherever you write your content.
So we just released an update of my top 60 running back rankings. I go through and I discuss why I've got players in every tier, break it down. You can find that on Razzball. You can also get personalized rankings for your league if you're not sure where to draft people. If you're like, look, I know who the best wide receiver is, I know who the best running back is, or I know where to get them roughly, but I don't know which one to take in my league because every league is different. We can offer you personalized rankings. If you check out the article on Razzball, you can even get 20% off as well. So make sure you check that out. And everything else, just go to ffdfantasyfootball.com or hit us up on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O, or on Instagram at The Fantasy First Down. Looking forward to more preseason football.
Absolutely, man. If everybody enjoyed football this weekend, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. And by the way, I want to promote this. It's very exciting. We're actually going to be doing our Sunday Live Start Sit show every Sunday live. Make sure you join us. We're going to answer all your start sit questions, talk about injuries, everything you need to know up till kickoff. So join us every Sunday live for this season. Really excited on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Also go follow us on TikTok and IG. And of course, make sure you follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter and all across social media as well. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. Thanks for joining us again. We are out of here, folks.
Peace.